My name is Edward Jameson, though most people in the neighborhood just call me Old Man Down the Street. I suppose that's fine. Names lose their weight with age. But my story, my life, my choices, my heart, it carries a weight that a name alone cannot bear. I am 72 years old. I've lived through wars, some of them real, some of them the battles of the heart. I've loved, I've lost, I've given more than I thought possible, and I've watched the world take more than it ever gave back. Tonight, as I sit in my quiet living room, the only light coming from a flickering Christmas tree in the corner, I feel compelled to tell this story. Maybe you, whoever you are, will understand. Or maybe not. But it is my truth, my confession, and my reckoning. It all began decades ago. My son, Michael, was just 4 years old. I remember the morning he saw the tree I had carefully decorated the night before with my late wife, Margaret. She had a way of arranging ornaments just so, the tinsel hanging like delicate icicles, the glass balls reflecting the soft light in every corner. That morning, Michael's eyes were wide, filled with wonder. He ran to the tree, circling it again and again, and his laugh, oh, his laugh, it was the purest sound I've ever heard. I had worked weeks to afford that little red bicycle under the tree. I skipped lunches, worked overtime, and yet I gave it to him with a smile that hid the exhaustion in my bones. When he hugged me and shouted, "Santa really came!" I felt a kind of joy that made every ache in my body worth it. That moment cemented something in me. My son's happiness would always come before my own. Christmases became a ritual of love and sacrifice. As Michael grew older, his wants changed, his dreams shifted. Toy trains became board games, candy canes became video games, and eventually, gadgets. Money became tighter, yet I worked harder. I never complained. I thought, this is what fathers do. This is love. Then life took Margaret away. Cancer took her before her time. I remember sitting at her bedside, holding her hand, whispering that everything would be all right, while inside I felt everything crumble. Michael was only 13 then. I thought that our shared grief would bind us together, make us inseparable. But grief, as I would learn, does not always unite. Sometimes it divides. Years passed, and Michael grew into a man, a husband, a father himself. I thought I would find joy in watching him build his own family, in sharing the traditions Margaret and I had started. But slowly, subtly, I felt a distance growing. Invitations became rare, phone calls brief, visits shorter and less frequent. I told myself this was natural. Children grow, they move on, they make their own lives. But the sting remained. What Michael never knew, and perhaps still doesn't, is that I've been quietly supporting him financially for the past 5 years. His mortgage, every month, paid by me, without acknowledgement. I didn't ask for thanks. I didn't expect it. I simply believed in providing for my son in the only way I could, even if it was behind the scenes, invisible, unnoticed. I remember nights lying awake, thinking, if he loses his job, if life turns against him, if the bank comes knocking, I will be there. And I was. Every month, a check for me, a silent promise that he would never know insecurity in his home. But this year something broke. Maybe it was his wife's influence. Maybe it was Michael's own growing indifference. I don't know. What I do know is the day he told me over the phone, "Dad, we're not expecting you for Christmas. Maybe next year." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the receiver long after, the room silent except for the hum of the heater and the flickering tree lights. My heart hurt, not just from being rejected, but from the realization that all the years of love, sacrifice, and quiet support had counted for nothing. That night, I sat alone, thinking about every Christmas, every sleepless night, every penny given for his comfort. And a new thought took root, a thought I never imagined I'd feel. Perhaps it is time to stop paying his mortgage. The idea was terrifying at first. After all, I had always defined myself by my ability to protect my family, to provide, to care silently and without complaint. Yet as I pondered Michael's words, his tone, his casual dismissal of my presence in his home, I realized something. Love without respect is a burden, not a blessing. I didn't decide in a single night. I spent days reflecting, reliving memories, weighing every joy against every slight. And slowly, quietly, I made my choice. I would stop paying his mortgage. Not out of spite. Not out of anger alone, but as a lesson, as a statement, as a reclaiming of my dignity. I spent the next week revisiting old photographs. Michael as a toddler, toddling toward a Christmas tree, his first school play, the wide-eyed pride on my face, the day he graduated high school, tossing his cap in the air while I cheered the loudest, my heart swelling beyond measure. Every memory was a dagger and a comfort all at once. I had given everything, sacrificed everything, and yet, in this moment, I realized that sacrifice without reciprocity is invisible, and invisible love can be broken. And so, as Christmas approached, I took the final step. I went to the bank, signed the papers to stop my contributions. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from years of tension and pent-up emotion finally finding release. I walked home through the falling snow, each step echoing the weight lifted from my chest. That night, I didn't feel victorious. I felt something quieter, a liberation, a reclaiming of self-respect. I set my small tree aflame with soft light, sat in my favorite chair, and for the first time in many years, allowed myself to feel something entirely for me. I realized then that Christmas isn't about gifts or wealth or even tradition. It is about recognition, respect, and love that is mutual. And if love is ignored, then perhaps it's time for a different kind of lesson. The snow continued to fall that evening, blanketing the world outside in white silence. Inside, I lit the fireplace, its crackling warmth filling the room, though it could not chase away the chill that had settled in my heart. I sipped my lukewarm tea, staring at the flickering lights on the tree, trying to make sense of my own feelings. How had it come to this? How had the son I had loved and sacrificed for, the boy whose laughter once lit up my life, now shut me out with a few cold words over the phone? I thought back to the day he was born. Margaret had been exhausted, of course, but radiant. I had held him in my arms, this tiny, fragile bundle, and I had made a silent vow. I will give you everything I can. I will protect you. I will love you endlessly. And I did. Through sleepless nights, long shifts at the factory, through illness and hardship, I provided for him without complaint. I did it all because I believed that love was measured by sacrifice. But that night, alone in my living room, I realized that love is not just sacrifice, it is also recognition, respect, gratitude. And when that is absent, even the greatest love can wither unnoticed. Over the years, I had been his silent guardian. The mortgage payments I made for him were my quiet proof of love. Nobody knew. Not Michael, not his wife. And I did not tell them. I did not even tell Margaret when she was alive. She would have insisted on revealing it, creating prideful arguments I wished to avoid. I wanted this to be a secret, a pure act of parental devotion. Every month, I meticulously ensured that the checks reached the bank. I counted my savings, skipped luxuries, sometimes even skipped meals, so that he could live without worry. I did not do it for recognition. I did it because I loved him. And yet, the sting of being uninvited, of being disregarded, made all those silent years feel suddenly hollow. As the night dragged on, I thought of all the Christmases we had shared. The early ones filled with joy and laughter, the ones where Michael and Margaret and I decorated the tree together, singing songs so badly that the neighbors must have thought us crazy. I remembered the year Michael's first girlfriend came over, shy and timid, holding a small gift, and I welcomed her as if she were my own daughter. Those memories, sweet as they were, now cut through me like sharp edges. And then I thought about what I could do. For 5 years, I had been quietly funding his home, shielding him from financial worry, giving endlessly without pause or complaint. But I had never given anything to myself. Never considered my own needs, my own dignity, my own sense of worth. And now, when I was rejected, ignored, shut out during what was supposed to be the most joyful time of the year, I felt an unfamiliar yet powerful emotion take hold. I would stop. I would end my silent support. Not cruelly, not vindicatively, but firmly, as a statement that my love has limits when respect is absent. I imagined the shock on his face when he realized the payments had stopped. Perhaps he would be angry, perhaps sad, perhaps he would try to justify himself. None of that mattered. What mattered was that I would no longer be invisible in my own life, no longer a silent provider whose presence was taken for granted. I sat by the tree, holding a faded photograph of Michael when he was 8, grinning with a scraped knee and chocolate smeared across his cheeks. I remembered how we had spent afternoons in the snow, building forts and racing sleds down the hill behind our house. I remembered how he had clutched my hand tightly the first time he learned to ride his bike without training wheels, how he had screamed with triumph as I ran alongside him. Those were the days of innocence, trust, and unconditional love. I also remembered the more difficult days, the school bullying, the arguments with Margaret over discipline, the sleepless nights when Michael was sick. Every moment, joyful or painful, had shaped the bond we shared. And every one of those moments now felt bittersweet, because it seemed all that love was insufficient to guarantee even the basic courtesy of inclusion in a family gathering. Over the next several days, I contemplated my next steps. I walked through the neighborhood, observing families decorating their homes, children laughing, neighbors chatting warmly. Each scene reminded me of what I had lost. Not the house, not the money, but the connection. The warmth. The sense of being needed and appreciated. I made no rash decisions. I wrote letters to myself, listing memories, sacrifices, emotions, and imagined conversations with Michael. I tried to measure the balance, love given versus respect received. And slowly, with careful consideration, I realized that continuing to fund his mortgage while being treated with disregard would be a betrayal of myself. Not of him, but of my own dignity and life experience. One chilly morning, I dressed in my old overcoat and made my way to the bank. The walk was slow, each step heavy, yet purposeful. I carried with me the documents, the account numbers, and the years of effort and love I had poured silently into Michael's life. At the counter, I explained my intentions to the banker, to cease contributions effective immediately. No complaints. No confrontation. Just the factual cessation of support. Returning home, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in decades, I had acted solely for myself, asserting a quiet authority over my own life. I placed my hand on the tree, its lights dancing across the room, and allowed myself to imagine a Christmas free from resentment, free from invisibility. I sat by the fire, recalling how Margaret used to laugh at my stubbornness. How she would scold me gently for giving too much, for sacrificing too deeply. And I realized that in some ways, I had been waiting for this moment all along. The moment when I would reclaim myself, when I would acknowledge that love alone is insufficient without mutual respect. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, not of sorrow, but of awakening. The realization settled in my chest, that life is finite, and dignity is priceless. And though Michael may never understand fully, I had made my choice. I had honored myself in the only way I could after years of silent devotion. That night, I didn't dwell on anger. I didn't celebrate a petty victory. I simply allowed myself to feel something for me alone. Pride, liberation, and clarity. I lit a candle in memory of Margaret and in honor of my own courage. I imagined Michael waking one day to the truth, and perhaps finally understanding. But whether he did or did not mattered less than the knowledge that I had taken control of my own life, that I had finally balanced the scales in a subtle, quiet, yet powerful way. As I closed my eyes that night, the flickering tree casting shadows across the room, I felt a strange serenity. The world outside was still blanketed in snow. Inside, I had made peace with the past, and prepared my heart for the future. I still remember the night it all began to unravel, the night I realized my only son, Mark, had grown distant in ways I could never have imagined. From the day my wife passed away, I poured every ounce of my love and attention into him. Nights were spent reading beside his bed, making his favorite meals, telling him stories so he would never feel lonely or neglected. I wanted to shield him from life's harshness, to give him a world of comfort and stability. But as the years passed, something inside him changed. The boy I raised, the boy I sacrificed everything for, had turned into someone indifferent to my existence. He never smiled when I spoke of his achievements. He brushed aside my advice and considered my support a burden. The breaking point came one winter when he didn't even invite me to his family's Christmas gathering. My heart shattered. But in that same fracture of grief, a cold fire of resolve ignited inside me. I realized it was time for him to learn a lesson he couldn't ignore. It wouldn't be a lesson of anger or cruelty for the sake of it. No, it would be precise. A lesson that would make him see what it truly meant to disregard the ones who sacrificed everything for him. I began quietly. I started by noting down everything. Mark's finances, his dependencies, his small joys that I had long taken care of. Every dinner, every favor, every small luxury he assumed was his right. Now it became a tool in my plan. The first act wasn't dramatic. I simply canceled the special dinner I had prepared for him one evening, the one he looked forward to every week. To him, it might seem trivial, but it was the first ripple. The first reminder that not everything in life is guaranteed. Over the following weeks, I began restricting small conveniences in his life. Financial assistance he had always taken for granted was gradually withdrawn. Utilities, subscriptions, services, nothing life-threatening, just enough to make him realize someone who truly cared could no longer be taken for granted. At first, he didn't notice. But slowly, the subtle discomfort began to gnaw at him. He started asking questions. His confidence wavered. That subtle vulnerability, the same kind of fragility I had once protected, was now the canvas for my careful work. I knew the next step had to be psychological. Mark's pride was immense, his ego fragile. He had always assumed that I would bow to his will, that my love was unconditional and blind. It was time to challenge that assumption. I began sending anonymous letters, reminders of his failures and overlooked responsibilities. Simple phrases at first. Do you really think the world bends to you? Think again. He dismissed them initially. But the letters persisted, growing more pointed, more personal. They hinted at the sacrifices I had made, the nights I had stayed awake worrying about him, the years I had devoted entirely to his happiness. Then came small public embarrassments, subtle reminders that he was not untouchable. Invitations to events he thought were secure quietly cancelled. Friends subtly informed of his missteps. All small, all deliberate. And yet each blow was enough to stir anxiety, enough to make him question the foundation of his life. Mark's arrogance began to crumble in subtle but undeniable ways. The house he took for granted, the friends who once seemed loyal, even the business ventures he boasted about, they all became fragile under my quiet manipulation. I was careful, never crossing the line into outright destruction. The point was clarity, not chaos. He needed to understand what it felt like to lose what he assumed was his by default. The next stage of my plan required patience. I began showing him glimpses of my own life, small hints of happiness and accomplishment that did not include him. I attended social events he ignored, reconnected with old friends, and pursued hobbies I had abandoned for him. It was subtle but devastating. He saw me living, thriving, independent of him, and it stung more than any confrontation could. It was during this period that I noticed the first real cracks in his confidence. Mark began questioning himself in ways he had never done before. Decisions he once made with certainty became hesitant. His arrogance, his sense of entitlement, his casual disregard, all of it was slowly being chipped away. I didn't act in haste. Months passed before the confrontation I had planned. I wanted it to be unavoidable, undeniable. One evening, as he returned home from a business trip, I invited him over, not as a father seeking reconciliation, but as a master orchestrating the final act of this subtle reckoning. He walked in, noticing the differences immediately. The house was neat, filled with warmth and life, yet conspicuously missing the small luxuries he expected. He paused, unease flickering across his face. "I see you've changed a lot," he said, attempting casualness. I smiled faintly. "And you?" He shifted, uncomfortable. I've been busy." "Yes," I said softly. "So busy that you forgot who helped you become everything you are?" His eyes darted, searching for words. But the letter of our shared history had been written for him. Each subtle withdrawal, each small manipulation, had painted a picture clearer than any argument could. He finally understood. His comfort had never been unconditional. I did not yell. I did not lash out. My revenge was not a spectacle. It was a mirror, forcing him to see himself reflected in the consequences of neglect and arrogance. And in that mirror, he saw everything he had ignored. His mother's sacrifices, my years of devotion, the life we had built together that he had taken for granted. Tears welled up in his eyes. Frustration, guilt, fear, and finally, recognition. "Father," he began, his voice trembling, I didn't realize." I placed a hand on his shoulder, not with anger, but with the quiet weight of truth. "You see now. You've been living in a world where love was assumed, but nothing is guaranteed. Everything I did, everything I withheld, was to make you understand that." And in that moment, I realized the subtle joy of revenge. It was not in the suffering inflicted, but in the awakening it inspired. Mark finally understood the depth of sacrifice, the price of neglect, and the fragility of arrogance. It was a cold December morning when I woke up with a sense of determination that I hadn't felt in years. My name is Robert Harrison, and I am 72 years old, with a lifetime of experiences, regrets, and victories behind me. I had spent my years trying to be a good father, providing for my son, Michael, doing everything I could to give him a life I never had. I raised him with love, patience, and sacrifices, never expecting anything in return. But that fateful Christmas, my world changed forever. It started when Michael, my son, the boy I had raised with my own hands, told me over the phone that he didn't expect me for Christmas. The words hit me harder than any blow I had ever received. At first, I tried to mask my disappointment with laughter, telling him, "Well, I guess that means I have a quiet house this year." But deep down, I felt a storm of emotions rising. Hurt, sadness, and anger, all mingling into a bitter concoction that I could not ignore. I spent that day sitting in my armchair by the fireplace, staring at the flames as if they could answer the questions I had no one to ask. Why would he say that? After everything I had done, everything I had sacrificed, why was he pushing me away? The room was silent except for the faint crackling of the fire and the soft ticking of the old grandfather clock my father had given me. I thought about my own childhood, the absence of my father, and the lonely Christmas mornings I had endured. Michael's words had reopened old wounds I had long thought healed. As the day wore on, I reflected on the years of mortgage payments, tuition fees, and the countless gifts I had given him. I had worked tirelessly, often late into the night, to ensure that he had a stable life. I had hoped that one day he would understand the depth of my love, the sacrifices made out of a pure, unselfish heart. But now, he seemed to take it all for granted. The anger inside me grew, not the blind rage of a young man, but a calculated, simmering fire that promised a lesson would be learned. I walked to my desk, an old oak piece that had been in our family for generations, and opened the folder containing the mortgage statements. Each document represented years of my dedication, each payment a token of my unwavering support. For a moment, I held a pen in my hand, contemplating the most difficult decision of my life. Should I actually stop paying the mortgage? My rational mind screamed no. This was Michael's home, his responsibility. But my wounded heart whispered yes. Days passed as I wrestled with my conscience. I remembered the long nights I had spent working 2 jobs, the weekends I had sacrificed, the vacations I had foregone, all to give him a better life. And now, faced with his rejection, I realized that perhaps the only way to make him understand the value of what he had, the lessons of respect, gratitude, and family, was to take a bold step. I made my decision. I would stop paying the mortgage, an action that would shock him, anger him, and most importantly, make him reflect on what he had taken for granted. I still recall the morning I made the call to the mortgage company. The voice on the other end was polite, professional, and unaware of the storm I was bringing into my son's life. I would like to halt the mortgage payments on account number 472-900-881, I said calmly, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil I felt inside. They asked why, and I simply replied, personal reasons. Little did they know, the reason was deeply personal, rooted in years of love and the sting of betrayal. That evening, as the snow began to fall gently outside my window, I called Michael. I didn't yell or scream. I didn't accuse. I simply said, "I've stopped paying the mortgage." There was a pause on the other end, a silence that felt heavier than any argument we had ever had. Then came the voice I knew so well, trembling, conflicted. "Dad, why?" he asked. Not anger mixed with fear, just confusion and hurt. And that, my friends, was the beginning of the reckoning. Over the next few weeks, our communication became a delicate dance. I didn't call him every day, nor did I write endless messages of justification. Instead, I let the silence speak. I watched from afar as he realized the gravity of the situation, the bills piling up, the reminders, the notices he had ignored for so long. I saw him begin to understand that privileges are earned, that love cannot be taken for granted. I also reflected on myself during this time. The act of halting the mortgage payments was not merely revenge. It was a lesson in boundaries. It reminded me that even a parent must assert their dignity and teach their children that respect is a two-way street. I realized that love is powerful, but it can be exploited if not balanced with accountability. And so, while I had taken a step that felt harsh, it was also a step toward healing, not just for Michael but for myself. The turning point came one quiet evening. I received a call from Michael, his voice breaking. "Dad, I didn't realize. I've been blind. I've taken everything for granted. I'm sorry." Those words, simple as they were, pierced through the wall of resentment that had built up inside me. I felt a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that he finally understood. Sorrow for the years lost to misunderstanding, the moments we could never reclaim. We arranged to meet in a small cafe downtown. When I saw him, I noticed the weariness in his eyes, the subtle signs of someone who had been humbled by life. He reached out and held my hand, a gesture heavier with meaning than any words could convey. "I'll take care of everything, Dad. I promise," he said, and for the first time in weeks I believed him. That Christmas, though unconventional, became the most memorable of our lives. The lesson had been learned, the bond tested and strengthened. I knew that the path to reconciliation was ongoing, that forgiveness was a process, not an event. But in that moment, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction, a quiet victory, not born of malice, but of love and the courage to act when my heart demanded it. From that experience, I learned that family dynamics are fragile and must be nurtured with care. Respect cannot be assumed, it must be earned. Love is profound, but without boundaries, it can lead to complacency and disregard. And sometimes, to teach a child the value of what they have, a parent must take a stand, even when it is painful. The father sat quietly in his living room, the soft glow of the Christmas lights reflecting off the walls. The day had passed in silence, a quiet that felt heavier than any argument. He took a deep breath, thinking about what had gone wrong. How could a simple misunderstanding cause such distance between him and his son? Memories of past Christmases flooded his mind, times when laughter filled the air, when small gifts brought joy, and when family bonds felt unbreakable. He remembered his son as a small child, running around the living room, eyes shining with excitement. How had things changed so fast? He reached for a piece of paper, pen in hand. This time, he wouldn't just act out of frustration or anger. No, he needed a plan. A gentle, clever step that would make his son realize the depth of love he held for him. He began writing, every word filled with emotion, every sentence carefully crafted. The plan was simple but meaningful. He would leave a gift, a reminder of their bond, in a place his son could not miss. But the gift was not the message itself, it was the letter accompanying it. In the letter, he poured out his heart, expressing not anger, but longing, care, and hope. He wanted his son to understand that love was stronger than any moment of disappointment. As he folded the letter and placed it with the gift, he felt a sense of resolve. This was not about revenge, nor was it about punishment. It was about connection, about bridging the silence that had grown between them. He hoped, with every ounce of his heart, that his son would understand. The next morning, the father prepared carefully. He chose a small wooden box, the kind that could hold something precious yet simple. Inside, he placed a handcrafted ornament, something that reminded him of his son's childhood, a little toy car they used to play with together. Alongside it, the folded letter rested, waiting to speak words that the father could not say aloud. He placed the box by the front door, where he knew his son would notice it immediately. Then, he waited. The house felt quiet again, but this time there was anticipation rather than heaviness. He imagined his son opening the door, seeing the gift, reading the letter, and slowly understanding the thought and care behind it. Hours passed. The father tried to occupy himself, cleaning the living room, preparing dinner, anything to keep his mind from spinning. He peeked through the window, hoping for a glimpse of his son, but there was nothing. Doubt began to creep in. Had he done enough? Would his son even notice the effort, or would it be ignored like everything else lately? Even as doubts lingered, he clung to hope. Hope was all he had. And he knew that the message in his letter was honest and heartfelt. It was a piece of his soul, a gesture of unconditional love. No matter what, he had tried. That in itself was a victory. Late in the evening, a sound finally broke the quiet, the soft footsteps of his son returning home. The father's heart raced. He watched from a distance as his son's eyes caught sight of the box. There was a pause, a moment of curiosity, and then his son knelt down, opening it carefully. The letter unfolded in his hands. He began reading. At first, his expression was neutral, but as the words sank in, a subtle shift appeared. His eyes softened. A small, almost imperceptible sigh escaped him. The father's chest tightened, a mixture of relief and emotion flooding through him. The letter spoke of forgiveness, love, and understanding. It reminded the son of the happy times, the laughter they had shared, and the bond that could never truly be broken. Tears welled up in his eyes as he realized the depth of his father's care, the effort made simply to reconnect, not to scold or punish. Slowly, he rose and turned toward the father, who had been quietly watching from a distance. Their eyes met, and in that silent gaze, something shifted. Words were unnecessary. The warmth of understanding passed between them, healing invisible wounds. The following days were different. There was no sudden dramatic change, no magical instant fix, but a subtle shift that could be felt in small gestures and unspoken moments. The son lingered a little longer at the dinner table, sharing stories of his day. The father listened carefully, asking questions without judgment, his presence calm and steady. At first, the son remained cautious, keeping walls up that had taken years to build. But the father did not rush. He understood that trust, once strained, could not be forced. Instead, he created space for conversation, laughter, and quiet companionship. He remembered the times when words had failed and actions had spoken louder. Now, he chose each action deliberately. One evening, they sat together in the small garden behind the house. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. The father handed his son a small notebook. "This is for you," he said softly. "Write anything you feel. Thoughts, dreams, regrets. Anything. It's yours alone." The son hesitated, then took the notebook. That simple act, the offering of a safe space, meant more than 1,000 speeches could. He nodded, and for the first time in weeks, a faint smile appeared. Days turned into weeks. The notebook became a ritual. The son would write in it, sometimes leaving it open on the table where his father could see, sometimes tucking it away in a drawer. Each page revealed a piece of his heart. Joys, fears, hopes, and frustrations. The father never pried. He simply acknowledged each entry with gentle words, encouraging reflection rather than judgment. One rainy afternoon, as droplets tapped softly on the roof, the son brought the notebook to his father. I want to share something," he said, voice tentative. The father nodded. His heart thumped in quiet anticipation. "I've been thinking," the son began, "about how easy it is to push people away, especially the ones who care the most. And I don't want to keep doing that with you." The father felt a lump in his throat. He reached out, placing a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "That's all I ever wanted, to be close again, to understand each other." The son's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I know, and I want to try, really try this time." It was not a grand declaration, not a dramatic reconciliation. It was something more profound, an authentic promise, born from reflection, patience, and love. In the weeks that followed, small traditions began to form. Morning coffee together, weekend walks, quiet evenings reading side by side. They did not erase the past, but they built a bridge over it, brick by brick, word by word. Each shared moment strengthened a bond that had never truly broken, even in silence and distance. The father realized that healing was not instantaneous. It was a journey, sometimes slow, sometimes frustrating, but always meaningful. And for the first time in years, he felt the peace of knowing that his love had reached its destination. Not perfectly, but genuinely.